Good morning and welcome to the first WealthTech Talks of 2022 from the Wealth Mosaic. My name is Stephen Wall. For those of you who don't know me, I'm co-founder of the Wealth Mosaic, and thanks for joining us today. We've got a really interesting panel on, I think, a really relevant and interesting topic around technology in the wealth space and broader, in fact, than the tech piece. We're going to be talking today about delivering a modern client communications experience in the wealth management space, and I've got four fantastic panelists who I will introduce shortly. But firstly, it's Chris Ansara, founder and CEO of Altav, Mark Trousdale from InvestCloud, and Jonathan Gane from InvestSuite. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I'll ask you each to introduce yourself shortly, but just a quick bit of admin from me. So we'll be talking for the next roughly up to an hour we've got on the site today. For those of you who want to pop questions through, please feel free to do so. We plan to tackle them at the end. The session is being recorded, so if you fancy listening into it again, want to send it through to your colleagues or whatever, it will be available recorded on BrightTalk and also on the Wealth Mosaic and elsewhere post this. Client communication, huge topic. I think something that arguably was not done as well as it should have been historically in the wealth space, but with all sorts of trends with regard to COVID, with regard to digitalization, with regard to changing expectations from clients, with regard to personalization and all sorts of things, I think it's an area where the industry has a lot that it can do to improve and to deliver on the expectations of clients. So less from me. I'll pass over to each of my guests to introduce themselves, what they do, well, who they are, what they do, and maybe some opening statements. So if I go kind of round the room or round the screen, Jonathan, can I start with you for a quick intro to yourself, your role, and if you can, an opening statement on the topic?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody that's here. My name's Jonathan Gane. I'm the Chief Sales Officer at InvestSuite. We are a B2B wealth tech and invest tech provider. We work with financial institutions all over the world. We have four key products. The one that is really, I think we'll end up talking a bit about today is Storyteller, and how you can use storytelling to really activate end customers and take what's traditionally a pretty dry approach to some of client reporting, quarterly statements, for example, and so on and so forth, and turn them into a real engagement piece. And so if I was to have an opening statement, it really is, how can we engage clients to actually drive more assets, more brand loyalty to a wealth manager's business?
Thank you, Jonathan. Mark, to you for your intro, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining. Mark Trousdale, I'm the CMO globally for InvestCloud, as well as the head of business development in EMEA. I've been with InvestCloud for 10 years, so since near the beginning, and my background is in wealth and asset management prior. So InvestCloud offers a single cloud-native digital and commerce enablement platform that we're using to help revolutionize the financial services industry. We focus on enabling growth at scale, so I definitely agree, Jonathan, on the kind of the growing the business imperative and how this translates to that for hundreds of wealth managers and asset managers globally, including some of the largest financial institutions in the world. We use an app-based modular approach. We'll be focusing obviously on communications today, and really communications are one of the main pillars, you could say, of where we're helping clients alongside planning and also shopping for and selling financial products. And we're used in over 40 countries to manage over 6.3 trillion in assets today. I guess my opening statement would be, empathy is so important in any human relationship, and certainly in client relationships. And what I've seen, I think we've all seen a lot of, is that empathy being intuitive and almost reflexive in a face-to-face setting, but to port that into the digital arena is easier said than done. So I think it's about taking that face-to-face empathy and making it possible digitally.
Thank you, Mark. And finally, Chris, over to you. Quick intro, please.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, guys. So my name is Chris Ansara. I'm the CEO and founder at Altav. We're a London-based RegTech company, and we help financial institutions send regulated documents to their customers. I guess the clever bit is that we use distributed ledger technology to streamline that process. And we offer a number of benefits, things like improved ways of working, I guess a reduction in costs, a reduction in CO2 emissions, which is massively important, as well as obviously making the customer experience better, which is we'll come on and we'll talk a bit about today. In terms of kind of an opening statement around the topic, I would say that in today's fast-moving, always connected, always switched-on society, earning customers' trust is imperative for the success of any business, and not just in the wealth management space. However, maintaining that trust has become increasingly complicated and also expensive, impacting companies' ability to innovate and to offer truly seamless communication. And obviously, we believe that customer communication is the gap and has a massive role in bridging the gap between obviously the financial institution and the customer, and maintaining that trust. And I'll be talking a bit about that today as well.
Yeah, super, Chris. Thank you. And thank you to all three of you for the quick introduction. So, look, there's many aspects to this, but I think if we can sort of start at the basics, what actually do we mean when we say client communications? Kind of what are the building blocks? What are the participants in this term? What does it mean to wealth managers, and what should they be including in the piece? And if I just continue in the same lineup that I went before for the moment, Jonathan, where do we start when we say client communications? What does it mean?
Well, it's quite a nebulous term when it comes down to it, because it can mean a lot of different things to different people. And I think when we look at different wealth managers who have different levels of digital engagement, it can mean something completely different as well. So very broadly, I would say it starts with everything from an in-person, face-to-face meeting all the way through to the statements and regulatory reporting that we send, or a wealth manager will send to their customers. So it can cover a lot of different aspects, and each one of those aspects has a different set of factors that affect how you actually take it into the digital realm. And we'll talk more about that as we go through.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, can you add to that in terms of what you see as the components for client communications, whether in a sort of traditional personal sense or more digitally?
Yeah, I think in a wealth tech sense, in a wealth management communication sense, there's certainly feature sets that we're all familiar with under the rubric of client communications, client portals for the professional advisor, RM, mobile apps, secure messaging, that kind of stuff. But I agree with Jonathan and Chris here in that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface in terms of what we actually mean by communication. If you look at the root word, the etymology, it's the same root for communities. It's the same root for having something in common. It's actually from the word to share, and I think that that's important. And so what we really mean is sharing in a way that deepens the relationship with the client. Part of that is explaining the services that the wealth manager is presumably great at, otherwise they wouldn't retain their clients, but actually putting understanding around that, and also context around the numbers, right? It's not just about the numbers. It's about, why did I make decisions on your behalf, client? How might I give you opportunities to optimize or enhance a tax strategy or look after your legacy, and those kinds of things. So I think it is about externalizing and kind of making the relationship shareable, and making an understanding of numbers and decisions about a portfolio shareable. So there's a lot of, I think, underlying currents, even though it gets manifested in tools that we're all familiar with in feature sets. And again, just I guess to kind of return to the theme that I mentioned at the opening, it's all about empathy. And I agree with the comment that trust, I think, is part of that. It's empathy so that there is trust.
Yeah, fantastic. I like the rooted in the community and the sharing piece. I mean, that's a nice way of thinking about it. Chris, I don't suppose you have anything to add on the sort of, what the components of this are and should be?
Yeah, no, not. I mean, I think the guys covered it, but I would just say it's about also creating a positive customer experience at every touch point. And there's so many touch points, right? And so, and then I mean, we know that companies that are customer centric are more successful than ones that aren't. So it's understanding your customer and then communicating to them in a way that they want to be communicated with. So yeah, it's and of course it comes from everything from as we spoke about, from financial reports right through to all the regulatory documents that you need to send through, and it's about making sure that those get to the customers in the right way. And then I guess what complicates it a little bit more is all the multiple channels that you can speak to customers and how do they want to be spoken to. So it is a complicated topic, even though, and it's quite broad, obviously.
Just to add to that, I think, I had an interesting conversation with a private bank in New York last month. And they've got a very, very strong brand, incredible brand, decades old, great trust of their clients. Their customer portal is terrible by their own admission. And then interestingly, what they were saying is when our advisors have these very good meetings with their customers, when they leave, they give them an 80-page tome of text, basically, to take home with them, which covers everything from kind of their macro picture to their portfolio to the regulatory disclaimers. And when they polled their clients, like, what do you actually do with that? It got filed under B for bin. I mean, that's where it typically ended up. So, what we see at InvestSuite is that's a missed opportunity for increased engagement. Rather than first giving it in paper form has some negative effects in and of itself, but how do we then take something that you need to give to your customers, but something they actually use and engage with?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it kind of comes on to the point of what the norm is in wealth management today. So we've talked about empathy and trust and digital experience and giving them a real feeling that they're valued as clients and interacting with them in many different ways. But you then also said that they then get a tome of 80 pages and it's paper-based and it lands on their desk and ends up in the bin. So, Mark, is that the norm in this sector today, or is it actually a lot more nuanced on that, and it depends where you are on your journey?
Well, I think there's variability out there in terms of how far different firms are, certainly. But I think that what Jonathan's describing is absolutely too much, unfortunately, the norm. I speak with a lot of clients who similarly have great brand, great trust, great client relationships, really great at what they do from a wealth stewardship and planning standpoint, but sort of fall short on communications. And I think sometimes that can be due to kind of going to the one size fits all. And I get why that happens. It's challenging to personalize, let alone sort of hyper personalize. It's not immediately obvious. And we're also talking about skills that, digital skills, that are not necessarily core. Every business has a core and a context. And, core for wealth management or private banking is typically not tech. Why should it be, right? So I think turning the idea into reality of making nuanced, personalized communications possible it's just easier said than done. And so I think I absolutely agree with Jonathan. I think the other thing you mentioned, Jonathan, is engagement, right? So the interactivity opportunities, whether it's ways to interrogate as a client, right, as the recipient, interrogate what I've received, not in a negative way, just to actually sort of ask questions and do those same things that you would do face-to-face with your wealth manager. What does this mean? What's actually good performance or bad performance? Why did you make these decisions? And allowing those kinds of things to happen in a digital way, I think, is much more appealing to clients rather than, give me a stack of paper, which is, Chris, to your earlier point, in terms of greenness, that's about as anti-green as you can get, right? And then also it's not bringing me into the relationship. So I have to kind of agree.
Sorry, I was just having a few issues with the mute button. Sticky key. Chris, what your perspective? Obviously, the paper-based thing is obviously a big issue for you and the problems you're trying to solve. In general, would you agree with Jonathan and Mark in terms of where the status of the industry is, the norms of the industry in terms of what they do now?
Yeah, I would. But look, I don't think and I'm not, the guys aren't saying that it's going away, but I do believe that the relationship-based model isn't going away, right? So the wealth managers still want to speak to their customers, but it's everything that's around them that needs to be sorted out. And a perfect example of what we're speaking about is is regulated terms and conditions, what Jonathan's mentioning, giving regulatory documents that you just don't need to be sending by paper now. But a lot of people won't realize why it's done by paper and the complications and all the reasons and the sort of regulatory requirements that actually make it quite difficult for companies, whether it be from a cybersecurity perspective or whether it be from, even if your customers don't even, if they don't log onto your portal, right, then how do you deliver those documents to them in a regulatory way? And there's things like these, challenges like these that you need to solve. But I also don't believe that there's a silver bullet for every problem, right? I think that it's having a combination of channels, and that makes it even more complicated for the financial services providers to try and have all the various touch points covered. And so I do have empathy for the wealth managers out there and sort of the responsibility that they have to deal with. But again, going back to your point around paper and the impact that has on the environment, it's criminal. And we're looking at the UK taxonomy coming into play in April in terms of reporting, and we're going to have to start to see those be reported in the next financial year. And those relate directly to your carbon emissions as an organization. So we're going to have to start to see companies having to start to make some real changes when it comes to the paper space. And that's only positive, I guess, for the end customer, but also for the environment.
Yeah. Mark, I like the sort of interactivity point, right? That let's say, coming back to Jonathan's point, you get an 80-page document and it's, it lands, but there's not really a way for you to interact with that document. Or if there is, it's painful and it goes back to just calling the RM or the private banker. When you look at what the industry does well now, or what works well in terms of client communications, what would you say they do well? And then the next question would be, what do they do badly and therefore could improve?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they do well is, and let me also vehemently also agree with what Chris said first about, the human relationship not going away. Completely agree, And so I think taking what works well in those relationships and really thinking deeply about those things, and as digital experiences are being designed, I've actually seen a lot of us go through that thinking and tap into their know-how well. And so I think that there's the understanding is brilliant. I think the execution is not always, doesn't always match, and sometimes that's just having been hamstrung by tools that didn't deliver, or trying to become the best tech firm in the world when you're a wealth manager, which is I've rarely seen done well. So I think it's almost the execution side, but I think from a knowing the clients, knowing what they like, knowing how to communicate with them, continuing to communicate with them, in live interactions, are all things the industry has broadly done well. I mean, the firms that don't do those things well just aren't firms anymore. They don't survive. But I think, in terms of, execution, I mean, a couple of symptoms that I see, where things aren't going as well as they could. More than one client portal. I see this a lot when there's more than one back-end system, whether it's accounting or it might be custody, might even be different platforms, different business lines, a discretionary business line, a non-discretionary business line, more planning focused business line. And, the kind of the history of how, which sometimes those are even separate firms originally that came together through an M&A activity, but that legacy, if you will, drags on the client experience. And I've seen that happen all too many times, all over the world, not just in the UK, but in America and other places as well. And so, and I think one of the easy ways to get around that, actually, that is underutilized, not suffering from the belief that the back end has to drive the front end. It doesn't. There are loads of ways to capture the data and unify client experiences, and it's a basic thing. But I mean, no client who is going to want to swivel chair to multiple tools which have different designs and different skins and different features, and nobody wants to do that. I mean, you see a lot of the big banks even. I think and going back down to the positive direction of travel, breaking down the borders and the barriers amongst their divisions that were erstwhile separate, so that they can capture people as they come along the spectrum. So from retail banking into premier or equivalent, whatever the bank calls it, into private banking, and trying to make those same teams over time, same systems, same client experience. Those are good tailwinds, I guess you could say, but the execution is not fully there, at least that I'm seeing.
Yeah. Jonathan, we'll come back, I think, onto the technology and the standardization and the legacy and the impact and how to deal with that shortly. But you referenced, on the one hand, a very strong brand, whichever brand it was in the US, that has a great tradition, great client base, serves them really well in maybe in a traditional sense, but technologically they are maybe not up to the game. What would you say you see well in general across the industry in terms of client communication, and maybe there are other areas that you can provide examples for where they're not doing so well?
Yeah, I think before I answer that question, I think we need to take into consideration that the industry's just witnessed one of the biggest seismic shifts in how we communicate. We have gone, this is a great example, we're doing this virtually as opposed to all together in a room somewhere. And I think we have to acknowledge that, 2 years ago, a lot of wealth managers weren't even really thinking about video calls and co-browsing and client portals. I mean, they were, and they were on a path to transforming over time, and suddenly COVID hits, and there's just been this rapid acceleration. So there's the kind of macro trends in the space, which are the demographics are shifting, there's liquid expectations for the new inheritors of wealth. To your point, Mark, as people increase their own wealth and they move up through different strata within an organization and servicing, they just have very different expectations now. So I think kudos to the industry for achieving what it's achieved in a compressed amount of time forced by COVID. If we hadn't seen COVID, I think we'd probably be having a different discussion today about what does the next year or 2 years look like in terms of incremental change. What we've actually witnessed is a seismic shift. What do firms do well? Well, they're fantastic at engaging their customers traditionally in a face-to-face, human-centric way. And going back to Mark's problem or opening statement at the beginning of the hour, how do you translate that into a digital format? And you can only do so much over a video call. How do you add that? How do you give additional tools to the advisor or to the private banker so their engagement with their customer is as human-centric as possible? So video call is one, co-browsing is another, an engaging web portal. For me, customer reporting in terms of what you send them after the video call's finished is absolutely critical, because that's how you keep the engagement going. That's how you leave, you don't leave that tome of text with them, you leave something that they can interact with, can engage with, and gives that sense of my advisor, my private bankers thinking about me even after the call is finished. So, it's what firms have always done well is that human element. The bit that needs to continue to evolve and continue to improve is that translation into the digital realm. And that's not just for the customers today, it's actually even more critical for the customers of tomorrow. So when we look at the intergenerational wealth transfer that's happening over the next decade, we're talking about trillions of dollars. What we see is that, and I saw some research, I think it was from KPMG last year, that said 70% of the inheritors of that wealth will look for a different advisor unless they have a strong, empathetic, trusted connection with the advisor. So how do you reach that person who isn't yet your client? They are the children of your client. And that's where creating these digital conduits is so important, and start servicing those future clients at scale in a profitable way. And you can start that with communication.
Yep. The number of clients who will look for another advisor, whichever research report you look at, it's never a small number, is it? It's always in the high percentages. So it's obviously something that the industry needs to look at. I think next question, actually, Chris, we'll start with you on it shortly, but looking at the impact on client communication of things like COVID and trends around intergenerational wealth transfer and whatever else. You've got some great stats on client reporting, paper usage, kind of wastage. So if we just start off on a kind of negative point, if that's the right way of terming it, what are some of the bad things that the industry does now that it could improve if it changed its approach?
Yeah, I mean, look, the customers aren't interested in cost-to-income ratios. They're not interested in competing priorities. They're not interested in the cost of regulation and legacy IT systems, right? They're interested in quick communication, responsive communication. I think, and so kind of, if you had to go, I'm sure there's lots of wealth managers in the room on the call today, and if you had to kind of do a SWOT analysis with them and you asked them, what are your weaknesses? I think a lot of them would say, the efficiencies and ways of working and adoption of new technologies, and I think that's fair to say. It's a challenge, and it's something that has plagued the industry. I think specifically when you start to look at things like simplifying processes, so that's one of the key areas. Now in terms of paper, I mean, there's enough information out there to know that there's a heavy reliance on paper in the UK alone. I think the last stats I saw is that something like 5.2 billion pieces of paper are consumed on an annual basis in the UK alone, by the financial services sector, at a massive cost, not just from a financial perspective, but also from an environmental perspective, resulting in something like 2.4 million trees being chopped down every year. Now, of course, that's not all for the wealth management space, but they do contribute. I mean, that's the broader financial services space, but they do contribute, and they do contribute significantly. And just I mean, you spoke about that pack, Jonathan, that your customer in the US was giving to their customers, and you're looking at 80 pages, and probably that's equivalent of probably about 350 grams of carbon emissions that to create that piece of, or that document, right? And to send that digitally, you're looking at roughly about, well, in our solution, around 4 grams of carbon emissions. You can see the massive amounts of and really, if the government's serious, if the industry's serious about our net zero targets for about 2050, we need to cut down on our consumption on paper, and not just from customer communication perspective, but also internally as well. And I know that's been talked about a lot, and there's a lot of digitalization has moved, and obviously since COVID, we've seen a move to digitalization and less of a reliance on paper, but it's still an issue and it's still out there. So that's one thing that I'd add from our perspective.
Yeah. Mark, looking at the drivers of this, what's influencing change in this area? Jonathan's touched upon COVID and the seismic shift that has had to happen because of that. Chris has talked about waste effectively, high emissions through doing things that really probably shouldn't be done anymore. Are there other things that you would touch upon in terms of what is driving change in client communications, whether it be from the advisor side, the client side, the business side, or elsewhere?
Well, I think consumer technology and just day-to-day interactions, people have, including up to a fairly advanced age bracket. I think there's a fallacy that sort of the folks who are the average age client of a wealth manager in the UK or in the US, for example, are somehow not that tech savvy. I think a lot of people up until probably at least in the 70s are using tech in a lot of ways, including if you just look at banking, how much e-banking, how pervasive it is. So I think our expectations have moved along from consumer tech and from sort of banking, basic core tech, transactions and transfers and looking at balances. And so it's driving expectation shifts. I absolutely agree that there are some environmental considerations. There's even, policy reactions to that, and certainly COVID that have, that are making sort of forcing step shifts in the industry. But I think expectations are changing a lot. So I think clients are driving it. It's a demand. It's in some ways a demand-led shift that is not, I think, fully appreciated yet by the wealth space. I mean, Stephen, we've even talked in the past about what do end clients care about, and there's sometimes there can be a lack of appreciation of that because the normal interactions a wealth manager has with his or her client is not necessarily, what do you think of our client portal? Some of them ask that question, or what do you think of our reports, or is it too paper-based, or is it not interactive enough, or are there ways I could communicate with you better in your time? Is there more context, market news that I could put around it? I'm not sure that those are the nature of most of the conversation. So I think there's almost an inadvertent blind spot to just how much expectations have moved along. But I do think that there's a significant demand shift complementing some of these things that I think the wealth firms themselves and the advisors also want to do, like cut down on paper and be more efficient and be better for the planet and things like that.
I think just to add to that, the customers themselves, when you go and see an advisor, it's a personalized experience. You're having a personalized conversation. But what you want after that is a personalized experience as well. So you want your reporting to feel personalized, not just generic and kind of pushed out the back door, as it were. So that's where we see the demand as well, is like what we're calling liquid expectations. I mentioned it earlier, is that omni-channel driven by, I know it's not a direct comparable, but people's experiences are being set by how they shop and how they watch TV with Netflix and how they listen to music with Spotify. And increasingly, even if it isn't the current set of customers, the next gen of customers is going to demand that personalized experience. So you're getting it face to face. Now they're starting to demand it for all of the communication around the outside of that as well.
Yeah, Jonathan, where do you think they are on that journey? Because the tome that you referenced, I imagine a lot of wealth managers think 80 pages of deep data, market insights is a really good thing, and they'll be patting themselves on the back for having produced that and thrown it out the door to their clients. But as you said, it ends up in the bin because it's not personalized. So you referenced the seismic change through COVID, and they're starting to do things differently. But if you look at what you're talking about with real personalization outside of a personal relationship, where are they on that journey?
I mean, it's coming. So when we talk to wealth managers all over the world, like our colleague friends at InvestCloud and with Chris and his team, there's a lot of, we're all talking to the same community of people around the world. And what you see is different people are going different speeds. I think we see there's a lot of discovery taking place right now. So by that, I mean, people are investigating the tools that might work. I think there is, as Mark was saying, there's this focus on we have to get the back end right before we worry about the front end. Whereas actually I would argue that these things can happen in parallel. Yes, if you need to modernize or upgrade your core, as it were, that shouldn't restrict you from also carrying on and building the front end engagement as well. The two are linked ultimately, but with API enabled companies like ourselves, with API enabled core banking systems, portfolio management systems, it's actually fairly simple. I'm not going to pretend you switch it on and it's working tomorrow. There's always some integration, but it is getting easier and easier. So don't let one be the blocker of the other, I think is one message. And I see actually the most interesting thing I see is less about actually what people are doing today, and it's about how the strategy has changed. So when you go and talk to the C-suites at these wealth managers or private banks or whatever it may be, you now see that how we engage with our customers is becoming increasingly a topic of discussion. Now, the actual mechanics of doing that may not have been settled upon yet, but at least the strategy is coming from the top, which for me is always the most important starting point.
Yeah. Chris, I'm happy for you to pick up on any elements that have just been discussed, but I wonder, you've got a blockchain enabled platform and you're tackling some fairly big issues in terms of paper use and other elements around inefficiency. How well is the market reacting to that? I mean, are they on that journey, or is it a hard sell? Do they need to really do a lot of learning and discovery, as Jonathan referenced, or are they kind of, we're bought in, it's just a question of how we do it?
Yeah, so I think exactly what Jonathan's saying is it's offering a microservice, right? We offer a particular service, and the fact that we use distributed ledger technology to streamline it isn't really the important part, right? The important part is that we make it cost effective, we make it easy to implement, which is massively important, right? And of course we make the customer experience better, which is key, which is what you want to do. You want to be customer centric. The DLT part or the distributed ledger technology part is really interesting, and it's I guess you could call it a cool currency in the fact that people are interested in understanding it. But the key thing is it enables us to give our customers and their customers incredible trust And I spoke about it at the top of the call, because effectively what we do is we protect the integrity of documents using DLT, and the fact is that it's super efficient in terms of energy consumption, which of course ties back to, there was no point in us replacing paper with an energy sapping solution, right? We needed to be cost effective and energy efficient, and so there are some educational bits around what distributed ledger technology we use, and the difference between distributed ledger technology and blockchain, and the difference between proof of stake and proof of work, and all these sorts of things that sometimes get in the way. But fundamentally, it's about the results, and we try to focus on those results. And it's a great way for people to use our solution to, if you want, for a better word, dip their toes in using DLT and seeing some of the incredible advantages and the scope of this technology. We're really excited by it, and the people and the customers that we're speaking to are excited by what we're doing as well.
Fantastic. Mark, I wonder, there's a whole range of challenges, isn't there? You've touched upon legacy technology, but we've also talked about in our day-to-day lives how we all use technology, and we frankly are used to it and kind of enjoy the simplicity and the experience. But wealth managers are maybe not there. What are the challenges that they are facing in terms of actually doing better? Because they probably want to do better. They realize they need to do better in most instances, but something gets in the way of change and delivery. What are the elements that you would cite as the biggest hurdles?
Well, I think if there is a belief, which sometimes I've seen, if there is a belief that it's going to be one size fits all and it's just about getting to the right size, then that does two things. I mean, one, that's not true. Untrue stories aren't really helpful for us. But because, and the reason I say it's not true like that, because if you ask a wealth manager, are all your clients the same? Of course, they're not going to say, yes, they're all the same. Of course, they're not the same. They're different ages, different assets, different services, different financial savvy, all kinds of differences, right? So of course, they're not going to say they're all the same. So if there's an organizational belief that you have to get to one solution to fit them all, you will be wasting a lot of time and letting great get in the way of good, trying to perfect something that cannot be perfected, right? So I think that there's a paradigm shift that's healthy for any firms that believe that to shift to, and that is focus on personas. What sort of groups, and if it has to be down to the individual, fine. But how, which personas do I serve? How did they like to be communicated with? How can I offer a multiplicity of experiences, whether it be in reporting or portals, or even in a pre-client portal, an engaged prospect type digital experience, so that each of those personas or each of those people can feel like you can feel the trust, can feel the empathy. And that requires flexible solutions and flexible platforms that allow for a multiple experience without building 50 or 100 experiences, right? And so I think sometimes there's like a belief that there's sort of an understanding gap in that, even though it's super obvious when you go back to traditional services. I think the other thing, which we've touched on a couple times here, is just this either fallacy that the back end needs to drive the front end, or that there's no way to move forward until the back end upgrade, if that's what a firm needs, which they might need, to Jonathan's point, until that's done. And there's even I saw an audience question here about the key differences in functionality between a back end core platform's front end versus a point system, and I would say generally the point system that may come along with a back-end system is not going to be adapted, typically is not going to be adapted to serving many backends, because why would it be? It's designed to fit on one backend, core banking system or portfolio management or portfolio accounting, and so, or custodian system. And so when that happens, if your business is expanding in terms of services or backends, then it's going to be inherently more difficult to have a single client experience to cross across all of those. The other thing I would say, and this is not, I'm trying to be pejorative here, but if you look at core and context again, for back-end providers, typically their specialty is backends, not design, digital, behavioral science. I would argue is also critical to move the industry forward in terms of front ends. And so it's a competency thing. It's also a how are things functionally designed. But I think, a lot of this always goes, for me, a lot of this goes back to human psychology and human beliefs. And if the organization believes they need to get to a place that is not actually the most useful path, that's going to get in an organization's way more than the technology, frankly.
Yeah. Often comes down to the human side. Exactly. Jonathan, Mark touched on some interesting points, obviously, about the persona, and then there's the technological side to it. Earlier, he also referenced the fact that maybe wealth managers don't ask their clients what they want in terms of delivery, service model, experience, the softer sides of engaging with them. Do you think that's the case? I mean, and if so, should they be talking to their clients about really truly understanding what they want from a service level, from a product design, from an experience, from an engagement?
Yeah, I think to some extent, I think, let's take a small step back. And when we look at the piece of the journey that a customer goes on, the face-to-face part is very, very important. And why is it important? Well, just look behind you, Stephen. I don't know if that's a real background or a fake background, but you've got books. And it's because humans relate through stories, right? That's how we process information. So the story part in the journey is always typically being face-to-face. However, where we are now with data and availability of data and the things we can do with data, you've got access to it, you can actually start to draw stories out of that data as well. So then it becomes, how do I translate my data into a story that can, again, complement the advisor? It doesn't have to be, here's the story with your advisor, and then it stops and you get a whole bunch of data. You can actually do a lot of really cool things now. So, what we're seeing is this, you start to become cross-discipline. So you take ideas of narrative storytelling and bring it into your customer communications, into your reporting. Don't have the story end when the client walks out of the meeting with the advisor. You can actually continue that on. So to Mark's point about personas and hyper-personalization, you've got the customer data. You know what they're invested in. You can now, using technology, and I'll just plug InvestSuite here, like ours, pull that data out and start to surface these amazing stories for your end customer. The story can be about the portfolio. It can be about ESG. How ESG worthy is your portfolio? So these are challenges, but increasingly what I see with wealth managers is they're willing to embrace cross-discipline ideas so that the overall journey the customer goes on has this narrative element all the way through.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Chris, looking at some of the positive sides or the opportunities. So if they do client communications well or better than they do now, or they deliver whatever a perfect client communications environment is, what is the opportunity for them? I mean, I don't know whether you have any KPIs or examples now, or whether it's just a vision.
Yeah. I mean, I said as well earlier is that customer centered. There are going to be winners and losers in this game, right? There always are, and the ones that are customer centric and customer focused and have a positive customer experience every time you engage with them, those are going to be the winners, 100%. And then of course, there's so many amazing technologies out there. But I really like what Jonathan said. There to complement the advisor, there to help him do his job, there to add some a servicing level that wouldn't be expected, that you wouldn't be able to actually do without the backing of technology. So I really like what the guys are talking about on the call. But I mean, I guess from our perspective, we kind of look after the boring part of it, right? The terms and conditions, and I understand that, but that's also important, right? And we've got to make sure that you are meeting your regulatory obligation, and if we can help firms tick that box and do it right and do it in a way that's cost effective and saves them money, not just from paper use, but even in comparison to the other digital alternatives out there, they can then look at some of the other stuff that they want to do, like improving their customer journey and I guess creating value for their customers and their customer experiences. So I think they go hand in hand, to be honest with you. It's you've got to make sure that you're doing right by the customer in terms of meeting your regulatory obligations, but you also want to improve that experience for them as well. And so there's lots to unpack there, but I'm just amazed at some. We often join these talks with you, Stephen, and some of the companies on here and the stuff, the work that they're doing in the hyper personalization space. What these guys are doing, it's really great stuff, and I think the industry is just going to go from strength to strength, accelerated by, as Jonathan said, COVID. So I think we're on the right trajectory from a positive aspect.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And just to come back to Jonathan's point, the books are real, but they're not mine. So I don't think they might not align so well with wealth management if you look at the backs of them. But anyway, Mark, looking at opportunity, can you maybe summarize where you see the opportunities to be developed here? Because there's some great elements of this in terms of personas and hyper personalization and storytelling and engaging and enabling the advisor and all sorts of different elements. But I don't know whether from a real life case study or from just generic examples, you can talk about what the opportunity is that you see from doing this better or doing this really, really well.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I think one of the big opportunities is behavioral science, and the great thing about or is to harness behavioral science, I should say, and use it to better serve clients, enhance empathy, enable hyper-personalization. And the great thing is that the inputs to it are already there for the wealth managers. And what I mean by that is the people that are their clients, right, who have certain psychological biases, like we all do, right? And attitudinal biases and preferences and ways of consuming information that make more sense to the person versus another person, as well as, as was being discussed earlier, the client data, right, which is there in the firm. So all the inputs are there that are needed for the recipe. What's often missing is the, we talked a lot about translation in a few different senses of the word, is the translation into insights that are actionable. But I have seen it done well. It is one of the things that InvestCloud does with our clients. And, just to give you a couple of real examples. So gaming theory, and I don't mean game theory in the economic sense, I mean gaming theory as in what the video game industry has used really well. Science of engagement. And this is not to trick people, this is to get people engaged in an authentic way because they're interested and the material speaking to them. For example, and we've got a few principles of this. We have an acronym called CHAPOS, and the C is for community. Going back to communication. Community is important for a lot of people, not for everybody, but for most people. That's why human civilizations have formed. And so, reminding people that they're not alone at their computer or their phone in a digital portal or looking at a report. Is one way to do that. Netflix came up earlier. One of the things is in what suggestions based on others and your viewing patterns combined in interesting ways, suggestions being made. You're seeing shares. If you look at YouTube and Vimeo, YouTube has been successful in large part, for the sharing and the community aspect. And so I think if you harness these things and bring them in, it actually makes a material difference to the client experience. And it's about the feature set's important, but it's less about the feature set to go that extra mile, that alpha of communication, if you will. And it is about things like behavioral science. It's also about decision theory, insofar, because, as has been, noted in a few different ways by Jonathan and Chris, I think making the advisor and or the RM or the banker look better, be able to do their job better, be able to serve their client better. Sometimes this is about helping him or her make better decisions with better information on a more automated basis. And that too is part of behavioral science. So it's not all, doom and gloom. I just think, and all the inputs are there, which I think is the really exciting and heartening part. It's just about harnessing those and translating those into real communication differences.
If I could add something to that, actually, if that's right, Stephen. So let me give you an example from an industry that has done customer reporting dreadfully for as long as I remember, which is the pension community. Okay, your pension fund statement you receive, you literally chuck it in the bin for most people, and then you start looking at these things in their late 40s and 50s. So we actually used our storytelling technology and took it to a pension fund, actually a Danish one. Their baseline engagement was 1 to 3%. So 1 to 3% of people that receive a pension statement do something, okay, whatever that thing is. We sent them a personalized storyteller version of the pension statement or the portfolio. Find out how to increase my return, 42% of people. Find out how to increase my contribution, 30% of people. Now, as an industry, we talk about winning and win-win-win. Win for the fintech, win for the wealth manager, win for the end customer. That's a great example of when you get the communication right, the end customer ends up with a better outcome. The asset manager, wealth manager, pension fund in this instance, it leads to greater AUM. And then, of course, our technology is doing what it's meant to do. So I think, again, like that engagement piece, that storytelling piece is really critical to all of the behavioral elements that have been face-to-face. You can now incorporate them in digital strategies.
What drove them to having that conversation with you, Jonathan? Because coming back to Mark's point, all of the ingredients are there, right? The customers are there, the data's there, the product's there. You communicate with them anyway, you just got to be a bit better. So what kind of triggered that conversation and made that Danish pension fund engage and improve?
Well, I think there's we're drifting into the world of pension funds here, but there is a general acceptance that communication hasn't, I say reporting rather than communication, just to specify. Customer reporting hasn't been personalized for years. I've been in financial services 20 plus years, and I invest myself on one of the UK's biggest platforms. I won't mention who they are. I've got my SIP there, my ISAs there, and the reporting I get is dreadful. And I'm someone who knows what he's doing. I mean, for someone who doesn't know what they're doing, I actually genuinely feel a little bit concerned. So as an industry, not wealth management particularly, financial services in general hasn't done client communication very well, client reporting very well. Outside of the regulatory element, which has always obviously been mandatory and is extremely important. But that is shifting now because the customers are demanding it. That's really what's driving it. We want to understand our money better. What insights can you give me?
Yep, fantastic. We actually have a couple of questions from the audience. I know Mark touched on it earlier, but the second one that came in, I think you answered the first, Mark, but I'll ask all of you and feel free to chip in. But the question is, how can wealth firms differentiate themselves when engaging with prospective new clients, i.e., and this comes back to, I think, what you said earlier, Jonathan, follow up to an initial meeting. So proposal post an initial meeting. Do any of you have a kind of view on how they can look different to whoever else that prospect client might be meeting? Mark?
Well, I mean, I can offer, I mean, I alluded to this very briefly earlier. We believe strongly in pre-client portals. It's something we work with our clients on. It works. It works because it's a very real way of engaging, and also for the I guess prospect, for the prospective new client, feeling a little bit special without a transaction happening. The key difference, and I know wealth management is not just about a transaction. It's not like that, but there is money moving, right? You're paying for a service, you're getting your money looked after, and when you're a prospect, you haven't yet paid for anything. So getting this kind of special, personalized, digital reporting, interactive opportunity, I think is part of it. There's creative ways to do leave behinds and sends as well, and but I think that's a really key miss that I see a lot. It's almost like a light bulb goes off when we talk to clients. They're like, oh, yes, a pre-client portal. That is a good idea, but nobody's really doing it. And so I think that would materially move the industry forward. We get it. I mean, the ways that it typically happens today are either public websites, completely public websites, but then it's not special. They can be very interesting, but it's not you. And also, you get documentation, but as Jonathan and Chris have said, just rote documentation alone doesn't feel very engaging.
Yeah. Jonathan, did you want to pick up on anything there? Or?
No, I think Mark has hit the nail on the head. I think it's your first touch point with your client. And if you're selling a personalized service, you really need to provide a personalized proposal and leverage technology. I mean, we haven't done anything in that space yet. But again, bring a story to bear, a personalized story. The problem with stories is typically someone has to write it out individually. And that's where using data and then some clever technology in terms of how you put together using natural language generation or other types of AI, you can actually end up with something that's very personalized without a lot of cost to you. And that's a big thing we need to remember here. It's like we can talk about technology being in many ways improving the overall experience, but it has a cost involved to it. So you've got to make sure the return on investment of going into that technology, of buying that technology or building it, if that's the route somebody wants to take, is actually going to pay off. And so I think being able to do it at scale with companies like InvestSuite, companies like InvestCloud, and Chris's firm is a huge opportunity, because you can get to market quickly for a fraction of the cost. You can actually service people at scale and give them the personalization.
Yeah. Chris, the second question also references, I suppose, the size of firms. So also coming back to Jonathan's point about cost, tech can be expensive, but is it accessible to smaller firms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think when we looked at our business model, there was no point in us just going after sort of it had to be scalable, right? At both the high end in terms of numbers and in terms of customer numbers, as well as in the low end, and that was important for us. And so I think the thing with technology is that you can also configure it to your needs, right? And so that level of configuration is going to impact how much you invest in it. But you don't have to have everything all at once, right? So it's a matter of what's the lowest hanging fruit, where are your quick wins, how do you deliver against those quick wins, and then you build. And I guess the other thing is talking about cost. We position ourselves in reducing your cost of what you're currently spending, right? So and because it's scalable, we'll come in there. And I know it's slightly different with the other guys in terms of it might be in terms of prospecting customers, and then obviously the return on that investment is the return on getting new customers, right? So I guess for us it's really more an operational level. Where are you spending the money, and how do we reduce those costs, and how do we make that affordable for you, depending on and being able to be scalable as well, I guess is the point that I was trying to make.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, as ever, time is running out. We have 3 minutes left, so actually under 3 minutes potentially. Mark, can we talk a little bit about sort of a future statement? So if we're looking at modern client communications, what does that mean, and what will it look like for the players that remain in the market in the next several years? Do you have a sort of view on some summary of what that might feel like for firms and their clients?
Yeah. Sure, absolutely, Stephen. So I think radically more personalization and opportunities to have a me experience as a client, right? A feeling of either that has been curated by my wealth manager, advisor, RM, IM, banker, or that I also have the ability to customize. I think that's going to be part of it. I also think that getting more efficiency, AI helps with that. Even just digitization of certain tasks helps with that. Make the IM, RM, advisor faster, better at his or her job. I think those are two big trends I see.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Jonathan, to you, a sort of future view on what this will look like?
Yeah, I think Mark's right. Hyper personalization, rich, engaging, omni-channel by default. So being able to interact, whether it's reporting or with your investor through any channel, your advisor through any channel. ESG, being able to bring ESG elements into the fore and how you report on ESG. I think, and maybe we need to do a separate webinar. AR and the metaverse could be an interesting discussion next time.
Let's do it. Chris, finally to you. What's your view on what the future of client communications really looks like?
The metaverse. No, I'm just kidding. But the metaverse is really interesting and a space that we're watching. But no, I mean, from us, it's simplifying processes, right? You simplify processes, and ultimately you get a better customer experience, and being customer centric, listening to your customers, and of course, technology has a massive role to play in underpinning all those advancements and improving customer journey and simplifying processes and delivering a better customer experience at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Well, we do have one final question, but it's asking for an example of a pre-client portal. So I don't know whether we can do that verbally. Maybe we need to collect someone's email and sort of communicate with them post the session. But gentlemen, thank you again. Much appreciated. Really insightful. As you referenced, there's loads of different ways that we could go into more detail here, but thank you for the time. For those listening in, as I mentioned at the beginning, the session has been recorded, so it will be available shortly after this to listen to again. But Chris, Mark, Jonathan, thank you, and look forward to another session with you in the near future.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.